Good afternoon. I'm here with Illinois National Guard Brigadier General Richard Neely, Illinois State Police Lieutenant Colonel David Byrd, and Illinois State Police Lieutenant Colonel Margaret McGreal to provide an update on our state support for communities across Illinois. Yesterday into today, 375 members of the Illinois National Guard joined local law enforcement in Chicago to assist with street closures. We implemented stringent parameters on their mission and use of force, including no interference with peaceful protesters expressing their First Amendment rights. Since that deployment, we have received additional reports of escalating situations and requests for assistance from communities around the state. We have now called up an additional 250 members of the Illinois National Guard to be ready to assist other cities across the state that have faced a surge of destructive action, notably looting, over the last 24 hours. Again, our role is to support the response led by local law enforcement and municipalities. We are working with local leaders and law enforcement to meet their requests for assistance to the greatest extent possible. An additional 300 Illinois State Police troopers are also coming online today into tonight to help keep our communities outside Chicago safe, with a focus on preventative measures and supporting local law enforcement where departments are running thin. The State Emergency Operations Center in Springfield is monitoring requests from local governments and around the state. Individuals from Illinois Emergency Management Agency and various mutual aid networks are on standby to assist. Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly will provide a live update from the Blue Room at the Capitol in Springfield at 5:30 p.m. today with more details on our statewide response. To bolster this response and give us greater flexibility, I have today issued a disaster proclamation for Cook, Champaign, DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Madison, Macon, Sangamon, and Will counties to coordinate state agencies and resources as we work to assist local governments with their disaster response and recovery operations. It is difficult to put into words the damage that has happened to our communities over the weekend, because there are small businesses and lives and jobs and public property to think of. A difficult second rebuilding to ask of people on top of the pandemic-induced economic strife that we're living in. 40 million people are unemployed in this country. In time, property can be rebuilt, but the pain will fall disproportionately on the backs of our small business owners, our working families, and our communities of color, and it has to stop. We have to take care of our people. And for that reason, we will continue to flexibly deploy Illinois State Police and the National Guard strategically as we work with the dual purpose of protecting Illinoisans as well as the First Amendment rights of peaceful protesters. I know there are people in this country, including some elected officials, who will point to the looting we've seen in Chicago and across Illinois and use it to dismiss the pain and anguish and sorrow of the moment. Let me be clear. We cannot allow those who have taken advantage of this moment to loot and smash, to also steal the voices of those expressing a need for real, meaningful change. That will not be our story here in Illinois, because this anger doesn't come out of nowhere. It's born of decades and centuries of systemic racism and injustice. The White House might fan the flames, but the fear that of what happened to George Floyd could happen to you or to your son or daughter is woven deeply into the fabric of what it means to be Black in America. And that's what all of us have to recognize. That's where our work begins. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brigadier General Richard Neely for some remarks. General.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. It is a somber day as the National Guard gets called forward again for additional support. As I've spoken with the Governor many times, this is the mission that we as the National Guard is most distasteful, is where we have to come in and support law enforcement, ensuring the security of our communities and our state. But that is our call. When the state asks for us, we come forward. And yesterday, we had 375, between yesterday and today, we had 375 guardsmen of the 33rd MP Battalion report to Chicago to support both Illinois State Police and Chicago City Police Department by the request of the mayor and the governor to provide that cordon around the city to downtown area, again, supporting those peaceful protesters and ensuring control of the downtown area. As I stated yesterday, each time the National Guard's called forward, these guardsmen step out of their civilian lives. They get a call, as they did yesterday at 5 in the morning, telling them to report. They pack a bag, they tell their families goodbye, and they put their uniform on and they lace their boots up really tight, knowing that they're leaving for a period of time to respond across the state, much like they have during the COVID-19 response. And today we are in the process of calling up another 250 National Guardsmen from the 178th Infantry Battalion, portions of the 2130 Infantry Battalion, portions of the 122 Field Artillery, and from our 3 air wings in Peoria, Scott, and Springfield, security forces teams from those areas to augment, again, local law enforcement throughout the state. 2 of those units, the 1 of the 178 Infantry Battalion and the 2 of the 130, should sound very familiar, as these units, one just had a majority of that unit deploy overseas to Afghanistan, and the other just recently returned. The 1 of the 178 Infantry Battalion here in the Chicagoland area has a proud heritage and lineage back to the 8th Regiment, back being the first African-American battalion in the military. And it's that unit that will respond to its local area, to its neighbors, to keep the peace in our community. Again, we'll continue to support local law enforcement. Illinois State Police will continue to plan along with each of the emergency managers across the state and the local communities and mayors to support a response to this civil disturbance that's currently ongoing. And I'd echo the governor's call for peace. Peace across our state as each of our communities continue to try to rebuild from COVID-19 and now are dealing with this particular situation. So with that, I'll be followed by Lieutenant Colonel Byrd with the State Police. Thank you.
Thank you, General Neely. Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Colonel David Byrd, Assistant Deputy Director of the Illinois State Police. The actions that contribute to the death of Mr. George Floyd is against the values of integrity, service, and pride that the men and the women of the Illinois State Police hold so dearly. On a personal note, I would like to say that as a black man, that the tragic death and total disregard for life in regard to Mr. George Floyd has hurt me extremely. As a law enforcement officer, I am ashamed that this type of lawful act that occurred on that day towards Mr. George Floyd by a law enforcement officer a profession that I hold dearly, has also hurt me extremely. The ISP supports the peaceful protests that are occurring across the nation and across the state of Illinois from members of our communities who want their voices heard. We're also committed to protecting the fundamental rights of life and property. Over the course of the past few days, the ISP has been working in conjunction with the Chicago Police Department, Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System, ILEAS, the Illinois National Guard, and the Illinois Department of Transportation, IDOT, to ensure that the safety of the public is a first priority. Over the weekend and into today, the ISP has proudly assisted our various law enforcement partners across the state who also share our mission of public safety, including the Chicago Police Department, Aurora Police Department, Downers Grove Police Department, Oak Lawn Police Department, North Riverside Police Department, Evergreen Park Police Department, Joliet Police Department, Calumet City, Lansing Police Department, Rochelle Police Department, Rockford Police Department, Freeport Police Department, Champaign Police Department, Carbondale Police Department, and a host of other local police departments. We remain committed to ensuring the lives and the rights of Illinoisans are protected, and due to this, the ISP will be bringing in additional officers from outside the ISP divisions of patrol from our various other divisions, including Division of Justice Services, Division of Criminal Investigation, Division of Forensic Services, and the Division of Internal Investigation, to name a few, to support this mission. I would like to thank our troopers across the state for their hard work, their willingness to help, and for the professionalism that they displayed not only over the weekend, but each time they put on their uniforms. I would like to end by urging the public across this great state to express their voice in a peaceful, nonviolent manner. We are listening. Right now, I want to bring Governor Pritzker back to the podium for questions.
Thank you very much, Colonel. Happy to take any questions from members of the media.
Governor, good afternoon. This morning, President Trump got on a conference call with governors. He had choice words, calling governors weak, saying that they need to be much tougher, that states are being overridden, and you're making yourself look like fools. Much has been made this morning that he said to governors that you have to dominate. First of all, what was your takeaway from that conversation, and what was your interpretation of when the president said you have to dominate?
Well, you heard my reaction. The truth is that the president has fanned the flames instead of bringing peace and calm. It is usually the job of the president to stand up in these circumstances and try to bring down the temperature. That's not what this president does. And so I felt, after many minutes on that call, I think we were on that call for 40 minutes hearing him express what I found to be inflammatory rhetoric. And then I heard other governors get on and not call it out. And so I spoke out and felt that was my obligation. I wish that the president would hold his words. I wish he would, if he can't say something that is going to help us across the nation to bring the temperature down, then he shouldn't say anything at all.
Yesterday, you approved the National Guard in Chicago in a limited role, as you have discussed. What is it going to take? You've seen the images of looting, not only in the city, but in neighborhoods around Chicago. What is it going to take for the National Guard's role to be enhanced?
Well, as you see, we are enhancing it. We respond, though, to local law enforcement, to local municipalities. We were asked to play a limited role yesterday and did so at the request of the city of Chicago. I think it's an appropriate request, by the way. I think the city of Chicago, has a significant police force. And much of it was out last night doing their job, even though I know that there was a lot of looting. The fact is that the National Guard doesn't have the job and doesn't regularly train to be a frontline police officer doing law enforcement in municipalities. We have military police who are trained to be military police. Some of them are police officers in their home counties or home cities across Illinois, but many of them are not. And so I think they were providing a support function. They'll continue to do that more, as you heard me talk about today. We'll have more of them out all across, wherever the municipalities have requested and where we can. But the important thing to know is that between the state police, which are going to have 200 plus troopers out there, almost 300, add that on top of the 375 that we already had from the National Guard, plus 250 more that have been called up. It's a pretty significant force.
And this next question comes from Charlie Meyerson at ChicagoPublicSquare.com. If you had any hope President Trump would take your advice, what's the number one thing you'd suggest he do to address the unrest and violence across the country?
Well, I think he should speak to the pain that's being experienced by people all across the country, African Americans, people of color, who have been subject to situations like we've seen. Unfortunately, the George Floyd situation was not a unique one. And so I'd like to hear a president stand up and talk to that situation, and also bring clergy together, ask clergy to step up. I would do that. I am doing that. I really think it is time to call for calm around not just the city of Chicago, the entire state of Illinois, and the entire country. That is in part the job of a president. This one hasn't done it.
This next question comes from Kelly Bauer with Block Club. You announced today that you are readying 250 guardsmen. Are you, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, considering sending additional guardsmen beyond that 250 if needed? Will their work change so they're not just managing the perimeter and downtown?
Well, it's their job to support local law enforcement, so we'll continue to do that and do it wherever they are asked to do it. And again, we have resources that we're bringing to bear. You've heard, when you add up everything that we're bringing forward, it's approaching 1,000 personnel from state police and from National Guard, and we'll do what's necessary here to help. First of all, to allow the peaceful protesters to do the kind of protest that's appropriate, and then to catch the bad guys.
And has the state closed down any of its COVID-19 testing facilities in response to protests and separate looting and having to call the National Guard to focus their attention on the issues at hand?
Yes, it's one of the unfortunate consequences of what's happened is we can't have guardsmen out there unprotected providing the testing while, we can't have police out there protecting the guardsmen who are out there trying to protect the public. I mean, it's impossible at the moment. So temporarily, the Guard, which has done an unbelievably great job, let me just be clear, we would not have the kind of testing numbers that we have across the state if the Guard wasn't manning these posts. But unfortunately, this situation has forced us to shut down some of those temporarily.
Do you have a number on how many have been shut down as a result?
I don't, but I could provide that to you. My press secretary will do that.
Greg Bishop from thecentersquare.com. What advice would you have for small business owners who are seeing images of looting and rioting? How can you assure them that the state is doing everything that it can to protect private property?
Well, we are and will do everything that we can to protect private property. That's you see here some of the bravest individuals, representing the bravest individuals in the state, and they are out there protecting private property, public property, and lives. So we'll continue to deploy as needed. These things have popped up overnight. Unexpectedly in some other areas outside of the city of Chicago, and then outside of even the center of the city of Chicago. And so we're being responsive as municipalities have asked us to step in, but it's not our job to go in and take over for local law enforcement. Our job is to go help them deliver their mission locally.
Some have questioned, though, after seeing images yesterday on the south, on the west side, that where at times there were stretches where there was no presence of local law enforcement, and are calling into question, is everything being done? possible?
Well, again, local law enforcement have strategies. The city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, as you know, managing the NATO protests and other protests historically, has the capability to manage this. They're the ones who set the mission here. But I must say that our Illinois State Police, which really was responding on an emergency basis to situations around the state, brought down the temperature in places. They managed to, dispel disperse the people who were, in Aurora, that were surrounding a police department in Aurora, police headquarters. And so, we're doing as we are asked by local law enforcement, and the Chicago PD has this capability.
Tony Arnold with WBEZ. Not counting the Bulls championship, the Illinois National Guard hasn't been utilized for civil unrest within the United States since the Kent State shooting and the protest of the Vietnam War. Given the gravity of that time, what does the significance of this movement mean to you as you prepare to deploy the Guard under these current circumstances?
Well, we live in some extraordinary and difficult moments now. During my lifetime, I have not seen this. I was very young in 1968. What I can say is that this has something to do about leadership in the nation. When you don't have national leaders who are bringing down the temperature in situations like this, it tends to fan the flames. Let's look at the words that the president has put out on Twitter. Look at the words that he says. He talks about total domination. I don't want to dominate peaceful protesters who have legitimate grievances. I do want us to put down the situations of people destroying property or violent behavior. And so I just, to me, this is extraordinarily unusual. And having said that, we will meet the challenge. And we have the capability to meet the challenge. The people of Illinois have the capability. And again, I would ask for people to step up and call for calm and peace in our streets. It is time really for people all across our state, and particularly for our faith leaders, to step up and remind us who we are. I am doing it every day, but I think it's very important coming from the various faiths that are represented across the state.
This comes from Jim Leach with WMAY. I think you touched on this with the announcement of your disaster proclamation and the counties that are touched. But have you asked for or given any consideration to mobilizing the National Guard for downstate communities that have been hit by concerns about protests turning violent?
We are being responsive to those municipalities and communities, as I mentioned earlier.
Charlie, we'll do one more with you, and then I've got a few online.
And the Tribune asking, again, I do believe you have touched it, but several Chicago aldermen, they're calling for 3,000 members of the National Guard to be deployed to the south and west sides of Chicago because of all of the looting in those areas. They've been critical that the Guard has been used to help secure downtown, but not the city's neighborhoods. What is your reaction to the widespread looting on the south and west sides and this request for additional members of the Guard to specifically target those areas?
The looting on the south and west sides and really all over the city, not to mention the state, is abhorrent. It is certainly the obligation, that we all have to keep our communities safe. And what I would say is that it's the mission that gets set by local law enforcement that is being followed. We're providing support services, which is the appropriate thing to do. And state police have been stepping up on the front lines because they have the kind of training that's necessary to be right there on the front lines, making arrests, for example. And so you've seen we're deploying state police, significant numbers of state police, and deploying significant numbers of guardsmen and women. Thank you.
Jake Griffin at the Daily Herald. Some child care facilities were set to reopen until 11th hour guidelines from DCFS requiring stricter staffing than in phase 2 and forced them to remain closed. Why did the state enact stricter child care guidelines, and are you opening to re-examining these?
We always want to make sure that we're providing child care, especially for everybody that's going back to work. And so we're open to considering changes in those guidelines. But I would point out that what we're trying to do here is to manage the challenge of keeping everybody safe, and particularly the children, these very young children. And you know that there have been connections between coronavirus and a disease that now seems to infect children. And so we're trying to, do our best to manage small groups, but within larger contexts of opening those larger child care centers.
Dave Dahl at WTAX. Governor, how does it help Illinois for you to call out the president as you did today?
Well, I think there are two things. One is I think we have to express our values. I think what I said is an expression of the values of the people of the state of Illinois. That inflaming, the kind of violence, and looting by simply calling for utter dominance of everybody, including the peaceful demonstrators, that's just one example. You saw, if when the looting starts, the shooting starts, you saw that the president said that and repeated something that comes from a racist past in the United States. So I think it's an important thing to call out the values of the people of Illinois at an appropriate moment. And, it helps the state of Illinois because I think people should know what we stand for. I mean, we're great people. The state of Illinois has produced some amazing presidents of the United States because of the values that we all share. And so I'm just reminding everybody that's who we are.
Jamie Monks of the Tribune will be our last question. Can you expand on what the 300 state police troopers' role will be in pursuing preventative measures and assisting local law enforcement? What types of preventative measures?
Maybe I should, ask Colonel Byrd to step up. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you, Governor. As far as the additional personnel that the state police will be providing, we have several missions that we have identified that we're going to use those additional personnel for. So, of course, we already have our crowd control aspect, and we've been using that for the last 3 days. And they have been doing an amazing job. We have a need from local law enforcement, local municipalities, for assistance with traffic control. They are requesting us for those type of details. We also are going to be using our officers to do just some of the calls for service that we have right now within the city. We have been inundated with calls of service, so those extra personnel will help us there. There are investigative components that we're going to be using our additional officers for as well. So there are several different missions that we do have identified in place, and we will be using those additional officers for all of those.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I want to add something important, if I may. There is an enormous amount of coordination that is going on between law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level, and I'm really proud of that fact. I was on a call earlier today with federal officials, with our state officials, with our National Guard. We are getting briefings from the city of Chicago and briefing them on our capabilities and what we can do to be helpful. So I just wanted to point out that the state police, which has the ability to rapidly to respond where there's a need, the coordination that's going on between all of these levels of government and in particular law enforcement is really spectacular.
This will be our last one. Sorry, I
Yep.
forgot Hannah. From the Daily Line. Governor, what do you plan to do with your disaster orders for these counties? What executive orders will you issue? Will you release funds via EO to help rebuild businesses? What else can you do to provide security through an EO? How long will the disaster orders last? Should a large relief package be considered legislatively?
Well, that's an awful lot leading down a road that we haven't yet gone down. I think what we're trying to do again is to operate flexibly, and that's what a disaster proclamation allows us to do in these circumstances. But it is limited right now to simply law enforcement and being responsive to the needs of those counties, without having to deal with a lot of red tape when you need to, move quickly within minutes or hours to help local law enforcement.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Yep, thank you.